The sun was barely cresting over the horizon when I stepped out into my backyard with a warm cup of black coffee in hand, the kind of peaceful ritual I had cultivated since retiring from my 35-year career as an architect, a profession that had granted me both joy and a quiet, well-earned solitude until the day she showed up. The dreaded HOA Karen, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like armor, striding across the freshly mown grass of my front yard like she owned the soil beneath her, which was both ironic and hilarious considering I was the one who designed the entire neighborhood. She strutted through like some self-appointed queen, and as she approached, barking about Section 4A, Clause 2 of the HOA bylaws stating, "Unauthorized botanical installations not approved by the landscaping committee shall be subject to immediate fines," she pointed to my meticulously curated botanical garden that I had spent years assembling roses from the Mediterranean, ornamental grasses native to the Midwestern plains, winding cobblestone paths I had laid myself, and a koi pond complete with a recycled waterfall system designed to be both eco-friendly and a peaceful haven for the birds in the area, and told me, as though she were speaking to an unruly child, that the garden had to be removed within 10 days or I'd be fined $500 per day thereafter until compliance was met, which might have offended someone else, but to me it was comedy gold, considering I was the original designer of the entire Windchime Hills community. From the layout of the roads to the angles of the rooftops, the drainage systems, the green zones, and yes, even the original landscaping blueprints, all drafted by my hand, approved by City Council decades ago, archived and signed under my name. And as she continued her lecture, talking about maintaining uniformity and harmony within the neighborhood's aesthetic, I smiled politely, not yet revealing my identity, savoring the moment like a chef watching someone criticize a dish he secretly created under a pen name. And when she finally paused to hand me an envelope with the notice of violation, I glanced at it, nodded, and said with a calm tone, "Thank you, I'll review this," watching her smirk with the smugness only someone blinded by faux authority could conjure, before turning on her heel and marching off, completely unaware of the firestorm she had just ignited, because the truth was, I had spent decades building not just houses, but communities, spaces that meant something to people. And Windchime Hills had been my crown jewel, the place I had poured every ounce of my knowledge into, and to be insulted by someone who had moved in just 3 years ago and now fancied herself judge and executioner of taste, that was something I couldn't let slide, not because of pride, but because people like her, the self-anointed enforcers of nonsense, were the reason good neighbors moved away and communities rotted from within. So I dusted off my old architectural licenses, the original blueprints, the planning committee approvals with my signature, and even the land development charter that named me as co-founder of the Homeowners Association itself aboard. I had stepped away from 10 years ago to enjoy retirement, never imagining someone like her would rise in my absence, but now I realized maybe it was time to come back. Not out of ego, but to clean house, because if she was handing out fines to the very people who made this neighborhood what it was, then it was my duty to protect it. So I made copies of every document, sent a polite email to the HOAS legal counsel requesting an emergency board review, and then did the unthinkable IRSVPD to the next HOA meeting and requested time on the agenda, all while Karen was busy gossiping in the Facebook group about how some retiree thinks roses belong in a desert-themed yard, unaware that the very reason her backyard didn't flood every rainy season was because of the drainage infrastructure I had designed beneath it. And so the countdown began, 10 days of silence on my end, while she gloated and strutted, walking her yappy Shih Tzu past my property and smirking like the cat who'd eaten the canary, not knowing that each smirk only fueled my resolve to reveal the truth at the right time. And when the evening of the HOA meeting arrived, I showed up early, wearing the same tailored navy blazer I used to wear when presenting city plans, carrying a leather binder filled with documents, and sat quietly until the meeting began, listening as Karen took her seat at the head of the table and welcomed everyone with her typical rehearsed enthusiasm. And when it came time for community concerns, I raised my hand, and as the eyes of the room turned toward me, I stood up slowly, cleared my throat, and began. My name is Richard Carter. I am a retired architect, former HOA board co-founder, and the original designer of Windchime Hills, including the landscaping you now claim to defend. And you could hear the gasp ripple across the room like a sudden gust of wind, Karen's face going pale as her clipboard trembled in her hand, and I continued, calmly laying out every permit, every blueprint, every letter of city approval that proved my garden had not only been part of the community's original vision, but had also been approved years before the current HOA Landscaping Committee even existed, and when I finished, I handed the board copies of all the documentation and concluded with, therefore, any attempt to fine me for what is effectively protected design falls outside the scope of this HOA's current authority. And the silence that followed was so deep you could hear the wall clock ticking, until one of the elder board members, a woman who'd lived here since its founding, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Carter, I remember when you planted those first trees. We were proud to call this your masterpiece. I'm so sorry it's come to this," and she turned to Karen and asked, "Would you like to rescind your citation, or shall we vote on whether to invalidate it?" And Karen, cornered but still trying to hold on to some dignity, stammered something about just following policy and a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The board voted unanimously to strike down the fine, and then, in an unexpected twist, nominated me to rejoin the board as an honorary advisor, which I politely declined, saying I'd serve in an oversight capacity only if necessary. And as I walked out of the meeting, Karen avoided my gaze, her power shriveled under the weight of truth, but I held no grudge. After all, I hadn't done it to humiliate her, just to remind everyone who built the ground they were standing on. And when I returned home that night, sipping the last of my now cold coffee beside the koi pond, as the waterfall bubbled in the moonlight, I smiled to myself, knowing that while battles with HOAs can be infuriating sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger or retaliation. It's simply showing up with the facts, standing tall, and letting the truth design its own justice. In the weeks following the dramatic HOA meeting where I revealed my identity and shut down the fine imposed by Karen, a strange peace settled over the neighborhood, at least on the surface, though I could sense a quiet brewing beneath the well-manicured lawns and HOA newsletter updates about enhanced community cohesion. Because Karen, stripped of her fake authority and public confidence, had not taken her embarrassment lightly. In fact, she'd gone silent in a way that only meant one thing: she was plotting something behind the scenes. And I had dealt with enough boardroom egos in my lifetime to know that someone like her didn't go down without a desperate attempt to claw back power. And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, a flurry of new landscaping enforcement initiatives began circulating in the community emails, disguised as friendly reminders but clearly aimed at me, including a revised community flora list that conveniently excluded nearly every plant in my garden and introduced a mandatory biweekly inspection clause for non-compliant properties, which would have been laughable if it weren't for the fact that some residents were actually falling for her rhetoric again, persuaded by her manipulative charm and well-rehearsed appeals to protecting property values. And that's when I knew I had to go one step further, not just defend my home, but prevent her from weaponizing the HOA against anyone else ever again. So I spent the next few days gathering testimonies from other residents who had quietly suffered under her. Rural families fined for having playsets visible from the street, veterans told to remove patriotic decor, elderly neighbors threatened over having wind chimes, and when I visited each of them, they opened up with stories that burned with quiet frustration, and I could see in their eyes a familiar mix of helplessness and resentment, the same feeling I once had when city bureaucrats tried to dictate the layout of a project I had spent years perfecting. And that's when I had an idea not just to push back, but to restore balance by rewriting the HOA charter itself, something only possible with a supermajority vote and proper legal process. And luckily I still had connections with the original legal firm that drafted the association bylaws when the neighborhood was founded. So I contacted my old friend Lavra Finch, now a partner at the firm, and explained the situation, and after she reviewed the charter and saw the irregular amendments Karen had made without quorum or legal review, she agreed to help me file a motion to challenge those changes and propose a full community vote to revise the board election process, reestablish homeowner protections, and restrict the landscaping committee's unilateral authority. And while all this was happening quietly, behind the scenes, Karen was publicly trying to rebuild her image by Organas.